Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of Science Forum, which is focusing on transformative innovation policy and how we are progressing and developing work using transformative innovation policy in South Africa. I'm Glenda Cruz. I'm from the Center for Science, Technology and Innovation Indicators at the Human Sciences Research Council. And we have been working together with the Department of Science and Innovation to grow and start and establish a community of practice of those who are trying to use transformative innovation frameworks in their work. And that's what we want to share with you today. So if I may introduce the panel, our first and key person on the panel and a key driver of transformative innovation policy in South Africa is Imran Patel from the Department of Science and Innovation. And we often say we have three kinds of groups of people involved in the TIP. One is the Department of Science and Innovation and their entities. The other is other relevant government departments and entities who are working in this space. And then finally, the researchers and academics like myself. And our work all, we co-learn and we work together and we take forward the work together. So on our panel, what we want to do on our panel is give you an overview of the importance and why we are proposing we should use transformative innovation policy in South Africa. Then we will just introduce you to one very important set of concepts, which is the use of transformative outcomes to complement our work. And then we've got three practitioners who have been working for the past few years in very rich and complex ways, grappling with how the TIP tools can add to their work. So let me just introduce you. Starting at my top, we have Valerie Naidu of the Water Research Commission, and her area of work is in water and sanitation. Then we have Mandy Mlilo from the Department of Energy. And finally, we have Clarissa Moodley, who works in a UN accelerator based in Johannesburg. And thank you. I see we have also the third partner in driving the community of practice is Professor Erika Kramer-Mbula of the University of Johannesburg. She's currently joining us from Europe. Welcome, Erika. So can I give over to Imran to start explaining and sharing with us a broad overview of TIP and the reflections on why it is of use.
Good morning. I hope that everyone can hear me well. And thanks for the introduction, Glenda. I must say it's a pleasure to be the only male on this panel. Normally, Dan and I sit and say we need to make sure that all panels are gender representative. And we struggle in other instances. So it's good that in this instance, the TIP on the directionality of gender equality is a lot more stronger and we can take it forward. So I want to just briefly, in 10 minutes, just sketch out, and I'm hoping I will just provide enough information for people who are not familiar with this work to be able to take a decision at the end of this session to walk this journey with us. It's not a short-term journey, as you will hear from some of the projects, but I would believe it's a very rewarding journey that engages you both in terms of how you think about things and provide tools and techniques to enhance the work that you do, whether you're a policy official or working for one of our entities like the CSR or the HSRC or TI, etc. Whether you're on the ground in a sector department, whether you're in the academic community, I think these are issues that we're all grappling with. So the first issue that I want, okay, My presentation will cover 5 issues very briefly. The first is just to share with people some contemporary global policy approaches that are shaping innovation. The second is the transformative innovation policy journey in South Africa. The third is to look at transformative innovation policy in the context of the SDGs, and in particular a framing that we're using in the transformative innovation policy work that I think is very useful and allows us to grow the community of practice in a value-adding way. And I hopefully will raise that and through the chat, if you want to join us in this journey that we're talking about, is to just make your interests known to us. And then I will just speak briefly about one case study I had in a previous version of this presentation, spoke about the just transition work, but if I cover both, it will just take too much time. But just to focus on one of the areas that we asked the team to specifically look at today, and that is the issue of employment. And this becomes even more urgent when we look at the recent statistics that were released by Stats South Africa around employment, particularly youth employment. And obviously, as I've been highlighting, their open invitation to join the community of practice. So in terms of global policy approaches, there are 2 major developments that are shaping the way in which innovation agencies and governments, not necessarily just innovation agencies, because in many jurisdictions, how innovation policy relates to other policy varies. In some cases like China, for example, industrialization strategy and innovation strategy is very, very closely aligned. But these 2 approaches are of particular importance to the South African context. And the first is the transformative innovation policy, where we have a structured partnership with something called the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium. But there's a second body of knowledge that talks about mission-oriented innovation policy. And I won't go through these. I've just put up some literature there that people can feel free to explore in their own times. You can Google this, or alternatively request this from the support team that we're building up. But both of these, there are a few issues that are important. The first is that they have a strong orientation to purpose and fundamental change in both instances. It's not just about innovation measured in terms of the number of publications, etc., which are important in some respects, but increasingly is to say that we need to give that directionality, and that's a term we will come to a bit later. The second is a very important discussion globally, and I think there's a session that was held yesterday on whether the whole COVID crisis was the 9/11 moment for science and advice, is that particularly over the last 2 years, with both the kind of need for detailed science to inform our COVID response, but also the use of technologies in managing COVID, whether it's online meetings or it's tracking and tracing, or now the controversial debate around vaccine passports and mandates. That interface between science, technology, and innovation and sector policies and developments become a lot more important, and trying to bridge that is very important. And in both these instances, there's a very strong focus on inclusivity. It's to say that the way in which we're going to be able to achieve innovation for impact is by bringing in as many voices, as many players as possible, including users and people who are impacted by policy. So these things are shaping, and they also find resonance in the South African White Paper for Science, Technology and Innovation of 2019. So just quickly on the transformative innovation policy, I see time is really racing by, is we started a pilot phase in 2016. South Africa was a founding partner. We also hosted the finale of that pilot program, which then identified that this continues to be important. There's about 5 or 6 countries that are working together around this. We started a full-scale program in 2018. And I think since that time, we've been using the Science Forum almost every year to kind of build up the information base and in the community of practice. The way that the TIPC is structured is that there's an international program, but we also have regional hubs. There's an African hub, Latin American hub, a Nordic hub, but then there's also national programs. And it's on the national programs that I want to focus on. So the intention of the national program is to support the implementation of the 2019 white paper, particularly the issues that are related to science governance and the way in which we fund and resource and organize and mobilize the national system of innovation. And the core focus over this 5-year period ending 2024 is to do core capability development within individuals, within institutions, and then SI. And hopefully by this period, and I can see the green shoots already where this target of building core capability is happening, but we can then take it to the next level, which is really applying it in deep and meaningful ways. If we achieve that until 2024, it's a bonus, as long as we can then build very, very strong capabilities. And the capabilities are, as Glenda mentioned, in multiple stakeholder communities. The design features are the 3 constituencies that Glenda highlighted. We use a flexible and dynamic portfolio approach. We have projects that come in as part of the portfolio and learn and work this journey with us. But if people want to add on their programs and projects, and I'll come to this concept of niche soon, then they're able to do that. But ultimately, we want to build a very strong community of practice. And so we have a growing community of practice. We meet formally in an annual forum, but where people have individual requirements for further capacity building, for training, for development, for mentoring, for support, then we are building that capability. And I must thank, in this instance, my partners in crime, Glenda and Erica, who are working tirelessly to build that support network that can support change agents in the audience or on the panel. And then very importantly is to localize some of the concepts, some of the ideas that are emerging from the international program and from regional efforts. We started off with this set of what we call policy experiments. I'm not going to go into it, and you'll see that some of the members of the panel will be speaking about some of this. Some have morphed and grown and changed. For example, when we started, we were looking at the rollout of stationary fuel cells in informal settlements and rural communities and applying TIPC thinking to that. It's now moved to become a much more fundamental and transformative effort focused on something called the Hydrogen Valley Initiative, which I'm hoping many will speak a bit more about. But Sanity as well has grown and developed, and we'll hear more about this. I'm not going to go into this simply because of time, and I really want to give the panelists time to speak. But what I want to just leave people with is 2 diagrams that I find extremely useful in thinking about how we build this community of practice so that we can find, and I want to nuance that constituency. Amongst the constituency, there's also a divide, particularly in the academic community, where there are academics who focus on what we call socio-technical systems. People focus on energy, they focus on health, they focus on sanitation. But there are many, and this is the effort that I think we need to spend more time on, and I would appreciate people in the audience who focus on what we call directionalities of change. And that is, for example, gender equality or no poverty or inequality or zero hunger. In the TIPC thinking, there are a set of socio-technical systems that need to be transformed and transition to something that is more sustainable, and we'll be talking about 2 of those today, in SDGs 6 and 7, energy and water. But at the same time, we need to make sure that as we do that, we are achieving these, what we call transversal directions. Today, the focus would be on 8, which is on decent work and economic growth as a particular focus. And then there are important framework conditions that we need to look at, which is the partnerships, and those things come through. So I find this a very powerful way of thinking about it, because as the DSI and as part of transformation framework work that we're doing on a transformation framework is to say, can we better understand what is happening in these 8 socio-technical systems that are underpinned by the SDGs? And how is science, technology, and innovation in its broadest space, not just technology, influencing and changing the directionality of these socio-technical systems so that they achieve those important transversal directions where the targets have been set? And then the second slide, and I will leave it at this because this might give the entry point into what Glenda wants to share, is a key part of the way we think about the TIPC work is this diagram, which with time becomes very powerful, but needs to be internalized in the instance. And this is the multi-level perspective that looks at how change happens. And in the context of a particular socio-technical system like energy, we have a predominant regime currently dominated by fossil fuel, etc. There's a need to create a new kind of socio-technical system. We don't know how it will look like, how it will be shaped, what are the characteristics, how we would interact with it from a human behavior perspective, and what actually shapes the new regime development is these things called niches. And many people are working in niches. It's when niches come together, when the connections are made, when there are landscape disturbances like COVID, etc. And the combination of niche work and landscape pressures begin to shift a system from one space to another. And hopefully in the design of those niches, etc., we can shift the regime in that direction that is more sustainable, that's more fair and more just. So that's 12 minutes. I would leave it at that, Glenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Imran. I'm going to just share quickly. So my starting point is where Imran ended off. And especially where he ended off on, I'm having a bit of a technical problem here. There we go. This diagram of how we bring about change. And one of we talked about capacity building in the community of practice, but we are trying to broaden the community of practice and bring in more of people who are working on the ground to see how they can use these tools and how they can be of value. So as Imran said, to address the SDGs, we need changes in socio-technical systems. Now, one of the first issues we found is that people are finding the language very confusing when you talk about niches and regimes and landscapes. So what I just want to do now is to talk a little bit to explain these in a more common sense way that can relate to your own practice. And then we will move on to the practitioners who've been using these ideas, and you will see even better how they can work and what value they can add. So as we said, to address SDGs, we need to change the socio-technical systems, but this is an absolutely huge task, as Imran has shown. And so the question is, how can an individual project or a program or a policy thrust within a particular department contribute to that? The first important thing is this idea of the dominant regime. It simply means that we've all got very accepted way of doing things in a socio-technical system. So for example, if we look at the field of sanitation, we would assume the dominant socio-technical system is that we would have flush toilets inside a home. And we know that we've actually got limited resources and it's very costly environmentally and it's not sustainable to have that to continue to be our dominant regime. So we need to find alternative ways to create sanitation that will be socially accepted and then contributing to the SDGs. If we look at the issue of decent work and livelihoods, similarly, the dominant regime, the way we accepted way of doing things is a kind of model where one would finish school, get some kind of technical or higher ed qualifications, and then go into the formal workplace. But again, we know that kind of regime is not really working anymore and is not sustainable. So we would have niche experiments to try to shift, to assist in deepening the landscape pressures and moving change much more quickly. So, for example, we might have an experiment around how we create decent work and livelihoods for young people in different ways. So then the question becomes, how do we actually bring about the system change? And the key idea is that we use experimental policy engagements. And what that simply means is we're looking at what are all the elements that we need at these different levels to bring about the kind of change we desire in a very complex world. So the policy experiments essentially are practicing what we want to happen. And one of the main tools we have is to design transformative outcomes for our experiment. And what the transformative outcomes gets us to do is we often have a program, we would design a program or a project, a change project that we would want to have a positive outcome. And we would design from the start, what are the outputs from this that we expect? For example, growing 100 new jobs, or we would define the outcomes, for example, employing more young people or more women. And we might want to define the impact, which would be improving employment and hence economic stability and addressing poverty and inequality. But what the TRP pushes us to do is to look beyond the goals and to raise the questions, how are we going to bring about this change? What are the activities and the outcomes that we need along the way to make sure that the change is happening in the direction we want? And how do we build alternative practices, which is in the niche of policy experiments? And what the niche is doing is creating an environment in which we can test and design new solutions and which they can flourish. And then our transformative outcomes lead us to a continual process of reflection so that we can improve what we're doing and then reformulate and move in a continual cycle, as you can see, to be pushing the change towards the right. And what we want to do through these niches, we want to do activities to broaden these niches and to deepen these niches. So what I'm showing you here is an infographics from a session we had where we worked with some of the practitioners you see here today to reflect on how they've deepened their transformative outcomes and how we can draw lessons for other projects. So before we go on to them, I would just like to talk a little bit about transformative outcomes and explain some of the concepts. So there are three kinds of transformative outcomes that we can define, and each initiates a process, but it's only part of driving change. And these might build on one another. They might happen sequentially. They might happen in a completely different order. They might be used in a completely different order. And we might not need some of the steps or some of the stages, but the trick is to design which of these transformative outcomes can be good tools to help us to bring about the change we want to see through our policy experiments. So, for example, we would have to first build and nurture niches of new kinds of systems and practices. And there we're trying to create new kinds of technologies, new kinds of activities, new kinds of practices, new ways of thinking about livelihoods, jobs, sanitation, health, energy. So some of the tools we could use, I'll start with an easy one, is learning. So We can learn from other experiments. We can learn through our own experiments. And in the TRP, we use different kinds of learning, and particularly second order learning, where we're doing very deep reflection on what works and what doesn't and what needs to change. Another one that we might be familiar with is networking. And to bring about the change, we would likely need to build stronger networks and create more opportunities for collaboration between actors. So for example, if we're looking at creating jobs, we would need some kind of collaboration between those in post-school education and training, those who are driving job creation in particular sectors through sectoral strategies, and those who are working around ensuring that we have decent work and that labor needs are met. So we would need to build this collaboration, and in this way, we're creating more effective and sustainable solutions to bring about the change we want to see. And a shielding is a very important one in the initial stages, where we would want to protect our experiment because it's new, it hasn't been done before, there might be a lot of criticism or resistance to it. So we might need to do it in very small ways initially, and then think about in other stages how we can upscale. So the next phase would be well, it's not really a phase, but the transformative outcomes that give us tools to expand our niche and to get more support and promotion for that niche more widely through what we would call the mainstream approaches. And obviously, we might have talked about upscaling, which we do to try out our experiment in different settings or with new groups, so that you can have increased adoption of the system, this new emerging system. And then lastly, I want to talk about a few of the transformative outcomes as tools for now opening up and locking regimes. And by that, we simply mean changing the widely accepted kinds of system through promoting new technologies, new activities, new practices. So here again, learning is very important. So people might have to unlearn what they already know in order to think differently about how things should be done. We might need to destabilize the way things are being done, and that's also a term that's seen very negatively. But we might need to shake up the way things are done so that there can be acceptance for new policy frameworks, new forms of governance, new activities and pressures. So what you're going to see now, what we're going to see when our next speakers talk is that to use the transformative outcomes to bring about change, you would have portfolio management and you would coordinate different transformative outcomes and different projects. So we're now going to go on to our three practitioners to reflect on how they've used one or more or two or a set of these transformative outcomes, how they've deliberately designed activities into their projects to be able to promote change, transformative change in the directions that they want. And each will be reflecting how they're trying to build a new niche through their experimental policy engagements. And as we've said, our focus today is the most pressing problem that we have in South Africa, and that's employment, jobs, livelihoods. So I'm going to hand over to Erica Kramer-Mbula now to moderate, and we're going to invite the first speakers to get ready. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Imran and Glenda, and good morning, everyone. Yes, my name is Erica Kramer-Mbula. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Johannesburg. The previous presentations by Imran and Glenda have given us an overview of the journey that South Africa is engaging in terms of transformative innovation policy. They've given us a flavor of the concepts and the theoretical underpinnings of what transformative innovation policy is. And what, as Glenda introduced briefly, we are going to now hear from practitioners. How does transformative innovation policy look on the ground? So in this session, we will be focusing on reflections on how it can improve livelihoods, employment, and jobs, as Glenda has mentioned. We have 3 projects that will speak to different dimensions, and each one of them will have about 10 minutes or so to give us a brief presentation. Then that will be followed by some questions and answers from the floor. We'll start with Valerie Naidu. She's the Executive Manager at the Water Research Commission, and she will talk about water and sanitation. Valerie, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I think from our experiment, essentially we had a concept called Sanity, which is how to transform sanitation in South Africa. Came from the background of research, which was showing the many backlogs, the fact that we couldn't reach full coverage, the fact that we were struggling around water, we're struggling around actually getting the right kind of technologies. And to be honest, there wasn't much options, especially where waterborne sanitation wasn't an option. So we then set about a vision. And as you know, in the water sector, we deal with SDG 6. But in the program that we set up in SASTEP, we also decided that it was equally important to deal with health and well-being, because if you are able to manage waste, you are able to stop disease. And so good health and well-being is an outcome from that. We also did a more deliberate and more intentional look at gender. And we said, if we're going to build a sanitation economy on the back of new sanitation, let's try and open the doors as well for gender. And so there's an gender intentional strategy throughout the SASTEP program as we go forward. And then we basically said, okay, while these technologies may be off-grid, etc., they can set about a new sanitation industry. They definitely will be innovative. And now we're actually changing a paradigm in terms of how we roll out infrastructure. Not just in South Africa, but globally. And of course, you can't achieve it without partnerships. So I'm going to speak to just a few slides in terms of how we've gone about doing that. The issues in South Africa are many. Informal settlements cropping up even more now after COVID. We have difficult terrains in South Africa. We have very dry terrains in South Africa. Wherever we put VIP toilets, some are being used okay, but majority of them, they fill up too quickly. They pollute the land. They also, the pathogens sit in the soil. It actually becomes a cyclic disease-causing event within those communities. And so we asked ourselves, well, is this it for South Africa? Can we set a new vision on the back of science and innovation? And can we actually be one of those countries that leads this revolution globally? Because the other components is water insecurity in South Africa, and that's just based on our climate. But with climate change, we know that this is going to become more exacerbated as well. So this vision was bold and ambitious, and it was basically trying to shift the current regime. So when we first started out, we started looking at a number of things within the SASTEP program that was set up. I like to, after spending a lot of time now with the Transformative Initiative, I think when I think about it, SASTEP in many ways is a niche, and it's important that it became a niche, because when you're disrupting a regime, it's important to protect it with the boundaries of science and research, because in many ways that opens doors. That's the way I see it in the South African water and sanitation context. When you're saying, look, we're looking to solve these issues, this is how we're looking to do it, and you're using a research, a science, a technology, and innovation lens on it, the public officials, the politicians, the communities are very open to actually engaging with you to see if something can be done that's better. So I think I'm not going to go through this entire slide, except to say, when you're actually looking at a particular transformative outcome, in this case, we were looking at off-grid sanitation, also known as non-sewage sanitation in the technical space. In the global space, maybe reinvent the toilet. We started to ask, well, what's the socio-technical system in South Africa and how do we play in it? When we first started with SASTEP, we spent a lot of time on the technology and the science. And we thought, well, as a research development and innovation organization, if we just do that, everything else will work. And then we realized, no, when you're disrupting a system, you gotta build a program that actually then engages at a multi-layer level. And so we started to then look at various other things. So from a policy and regulation, how do we look at working with the policy department, the governance departments, the implementers, which are public sector institutions? Then how do you work around getting that product in a standardized form? How do you bring affordability? Because we don't want a product that is going to affluent areas and then cannot solve the sanitation issue. So how do we work with that? How do we actually test these things in various segments so we open up the markets in that space? And then when it comes to sanitation, it's a very taboo subject, but it is something that we also have to look at in how are people accepting the technologies? How are people accepting the changes? And it's important to then be very sensitive around this in terms of what you're trying to promote around this new set of infrastructure, this new set of technology that you're bringing into that space. So I think here, this slide is just to say it is complex. You must know your socio-technical system. You don't need to know it at the start. I think when Imran spoke about agility, even when you're doing a policy experiment, you must maintain the principles of agility and flexibility and learning, even within your niche, that you bring it to the project and keep changing and reviewing it quite often. So I'm just going to speak here about a really big issue that is in the science and innovation space, which is really, if we are to have technology uptake, you just have to have a good product at the right price and then, everything will happen. That doesn't quite happen in the water and sanitation sector. And so you have to then say, how do I organize for policy and regulation frameworks? How do I work with those policymakers? How do I work with the regulators? How do I bring them in and exchange this information, and then they work with us to then revive or review aspects of their policy, which is then enabling for this new industry. So the public sector in the water and sanitation sector is the biggest buyer of sanitation technology, and there are complex processes around decision-making and procurement. So you have to keep working with them to try and understand how to unlock that, which will then lead to greater scaling and adoption. So in this space, we took a very much an engagement process with public officials, both at municipal level and at national government level. And we then, once we start doing some of these demos on the ground, we believe that they'll get confidence in the technologies, they'll understand the costing, how to do the operations and maintenance, and then that will flow into replication into the future. Now remember, that's our assumption, and we're working with these partners. And I think the one thing about the transformative outcomes, it's always a journey. You set a design of your project and you work with actors and you try and open spaces, and then you find that maybe you just needed to do two or three things differently, and then you readjust, and then you work again with the same actors and try and open those spaces so that you are able to get that. So here I was just taking one example. So something as simple on non-sewage or off-grid sanitation requires standards and certifications at the end. And here basically we had to work with originally South African Bureau of Standards. Then we found that the business case wasn't there. Why? Because we're trying to set up a fledgling or a niche industry. And so we then had to map the ecosystem partners and bring them together, create a terms of reference and work with them and say, okay, we can't set up SABS, but can we set up a pilot and then show you how this is done in the sector? And here we bring global partners in to create a certification scheme. We bring local partners like Agrimore, who kind of works in that space when there are no standards. We bring academics like the University of KwaZulu-Natal that was working on the standards to kind of fit in and say, how do we now take the ISO standards and then also create a certification scheme Why is this important? Well, it gives this kind of leveling of the playing field for all the developers of the technology. It then also gives quite a level of confidence to the municipalities and the national governments to say, well, we're working off a standard, we're working off a certification. Therefore, we can buy these products with a certain level of confidence that it has been de-risked in the system. So you'll see that as we were working through, we were working with transformative outcomes too, where we were learning, we were broadening those networks. We were working with the expectation dynamics with all of these multiple players. And we were trying to bring in and understand how the system needed to work so that we could actually realize this vision. So this is just the standards part, one aspect. Then when we started thinking about upscaling, so how would you upscale? Currently, we use VIP toilets as the norm. So how are you going to destabilize this? And the way to do that is to actually make sure that you maybe work with a set number within the project. And here we were lucky enough to get engaged with the presidency, the SAFE program, which is sanitation for schools. And we said, well, let's put some budgets for 10 schools and let's go and do some innovative technologies in those 10 schools. At the moment, we've got 3 that is operational. We've still got 7 contracts to go. But for us, that gives us a nice number of technologies to test in schools, to see whether the kids accept it, to see how the principals and school governing bodies react to it, to see whether a janitor, what is required in terms of, is there an opportunity for job creation? What are the operations and maintenance around the school? What is the OPEX? What is the CAPEX? And those are the kind of numbers that lead to the financial case. And that's what then leads to sometimes the uptake of these technologies. So school sanitation is a big problem. And we believe with these 10 sort of almost a project on its own, dealing with schools itself, we will open up a different space for a new type of sanitation in schools in South Africa, especially in those areas that are rural, very little water, off the grid, won't be connected to the grid in the next 5 or 10 years. So as you can see, the ones in blue doesn't necessarily mean these are the exact steps. It just means that as we work along, we work with partners to see how to bring different partners in to support the tech innovators, to support the policymakers to understand how to take some of these technologies forward. So I think in my final slide, I just wanted to say that even though there are transformative outcomes, I think 1 to 12, we don't, in this experiment, use it in a sequential way. So there's no seamless handover between one. You actually have to understand your socio-dynamic system. For example, the work around institutionalization. We've got a task group that is run by Department of Water and Sanitation. They're looking at roadmap, norms and standards, alternate technologies, and then basically looking at how they incorporate some of these ISO standards in terms of their regulatory mechanism. So by doing that, you're working with the guys that will then roll out this. They've now brought within that Department of Basic Education, COPTA, Department of Human Settlements, Public Works. And what this means now, we're starting to engage around non-sewage sanitation as a system in South Africa, where we're saying, we're all agreeing these are the norms and standards. So these are the kind of guidelines that we use. We're all agreeing these are the kinds of technologies that could solve the problem. So here, SASTEP is offering to do that kind of evaluation for you. And we're all agreeing in terms of how to also look a little bit more broader in terms of the operations and maintenance, so that we get more sustainability in terms of the system, as well as in terms of how could we look at the grant system just a little bit more differently, and maybe look at operations maintenance as the next job creation program for South Africa. So as you can see, lots of actors, lots of players, but having SASTEP there actually allows some of these engagements to occur. And I think it creates an environment that allows us to experiment both at the policy as well as the research as well as the implementer stage, while getting used to this new set or this new regime that is being proposed for the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Valerie, for a fascinating presentation and for sticking to time. Before we get, so I would like the audience to please gather your questions and your comments for the Q&A session. Just following the three presentations, we'll move now to the second presenter. Clariska Moodley, she's the head of the experimentation at the UNDP Accelerator Lab in South Africa, and she will talk about incubating entrepreneurship. Clariska, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you for the great introduction from all the speakers so far. So as Erica mentioned, I'm from the United Nations Development Program, that's UNDP, and specifically from their Accelerator Program. I think the best way to demonstrate how the transformative innovation approach can actually improve livelihoods is to share our story of the UNDP Accelerator Laboratory. The laboratory essentially is a network of labs that are operating across 93 countries globally. When the Accelerator Labs, or the ACLab as they're popularly known, came into operation, the designers never really formally applied the transformative innovation approach to guide the work of the labs. However, now, about 2 years later, the transformative innovation approach is distinctly prevalent in our way of work. And this was not through deliberate attempts to do so, but through a natural emergence. As the ACLab's mandate is to accelerate progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, and as these SDGs address social, environmental, and economic outcomes, it's not surprising then that this convergence was actually realized. So let me explain this a little bit more. So the UNDP launched the Accelerator Labs in 2019. The ACLabs are UNDP's bold move towards reimagining development in the 21st century. The ACLab's purpose is to deliver development in a way that favors systems thinking, global knowledge sharing, and evidence-based decision-making. With 21st century skills and a boisterous attitude, ACLab teams were tasked to convert a very traditional institution into the next generation UNDP. The lab's mission was to radically shift the needle on the achievement of the SDGs by identifying, testing, and scaling local innovation. To paint the picture a little bit more clearly, here we were, this team of 180 bright-eyed, bushy-tailed individuals arriving at the United Nations, ready to change the world. While together we were 180, we were merely 3 people in a country with this mammoth task: destabilize and transform UNDP systems while mainstreaming local South African innovation. The injection of the Accelerator Labs, which we consider an emerging niche, into the UN's leading development agency, which we consider the current regime, was confronted with a lot of hesitation and many questions. And furthermore, many of the labs were positioned into national innovation systems that were quite mature, and many raised eyebrows about this new UNDP offering. Now, 2 years later, the ACLab has successfully supported UNDP to experiment on various innovations. Now, these innovations include low-cost internet technology, gardening systems that recycle waste, converters of food waste into value-add services, online education systems, mobile apps that promote youth employment, and water security innovations. And this is just some of them. Through experimenting and even scaling some of these innovations, we not only address societal challenges such as water and food security, but are also supporting small businesses or young innovators to roll out their products and services. In the process of experimenting with innovations, we capacitate small businesses to enhance their products, understand the marketplace better, develop more robust business models, and understand their skills requirements even better. However, supporting these small businesses directly is only the first tier when it comes to supporting livelihoods. The second tier of support is the supply or value chain that supports these small business operations. For example, in the case of the low-cost internet technology, the raw materials required to build this technology are currently being imported. However, once this product is rolled out at scale, local manufacturing of the raw materials becomes economically feasible, and this boosts local job creation even further. The next tier of supporting livelihoods is achieved through the innovations themselves, and this tier has a multiplier effect within the beneficiary communities and is often quite difficult to quantify. Most often, the innovations that UNDP experiments with address basic needs such as water and food security. Once such basic needs become available, populations begin to participate in their local economy. For example, when water becomes available, communities can farm crops, which can be sold or consumed. Women, who often face the burden of collecting water, are freed to participate in education or employment-related activities. And because water enables good hygiene and therefore good health, this leads to even more opportunities. An example that we've seen firsthand was through the rollout of food gardens in rural KwaZulu-Natal. The gardens produced enough food such that the households saved money by not purchasing food and not traveling to the local food markets. Some households produced excess crops or surplus crops, and this was sold at local markets, resulting in additional income, or they simply donated the surplus to other community members in need. The rollout of these gardens also supported local businesses in those areas who provided the raw materials needed to construct the garden, such as wood, such as net, etc., such as tools. More so, households were trained in agricultural practices, in livestock rearing, which provided them with the skills that will be beneficial long after the project itself, instilling a culture of farming and self-sufficiency. Another example to demonstrate this multiplier effect when it comes to supporting livelihoods is the project enabling internet connectivity to rural communities. The internet access is enabled through small businesses who we call network service providers, or ICT businesses. And by having access to the internet, local businesses are also empowered to trade online. Local schools can connect to online education systems, and eventually even telemedicine becomes possible in remote regions where access to healthcare is difficult. Hence, the impact on livelihoods through these types of transformative innovation projects is actually limitless, and it's very difficult to quantify. Transformative innovation policy, as mentioned by the previous speakers, is centered around experimentation, that is, simply learning from doing. Similarly, the ACT Labs have an experimentation portfolio to ensure that innovations are first tested before they can be scaled. This ensures that evidence is first generated to demonstrate the innovation's potential success before resources are invested to scale the innovation further. Now, this reduces the risk of failure and the loss of resources, and this is especially important in the development landscape, where development financing is very difficult to secure. Experimentation never really fails. If testing proves an innovation unsuccessful, it educates that small business or that young innovator on how to improve. So there really is no loss when it comes to experimentation. Experimentation therefore aims to accelerate learning to achieve the SDGs. And here again, ACT Lab methodologies directly align with TIP. While transformative innovation policy did not inform our strategy upfront, the more we reflected on our own journey, the clearer it becomes how unknowingly the TIP approach contributed to ACT Lab South Africa's success, and more so, resulted in this tier effect of supporting livelihoods, entrepreneurship, and youth development in South Africa. In fact, youth and women empowerment, as well as entrepreneurship, serves as the bedrock of UNDP's 5-year strategy that aims to eradicate inequality, poverty, and unemployment in South Africa. In fact, the deeper we dive into the TIP approach and the ACLAB's mandate to drive progress on the SDGs, the more prevalent it becomes that driving innovation to address the needs of society and the environment can support economic growth. So how did the ACLAB find this similarity and hence convergence with TIP? When the ACLABs were founded, we had to ensure that we address the SDGs, that is, impact people and the planet. This forced us to focus less on the technology and more on the beneficiaries. The mindset shift that this negated was to place the end user at the forefront and examine the readiness of the supporting ecosystem to successfully scale and the identified solutions. And Valerie mentioned the importance of that ecosystem approach. Traditional research and development focuses on the technology, the likelihood of academic publications, the novelty, and only focuses on the end user and the ecosystem later on, or the environmental and socio-economic impact much later on. The ACLAB actually favors co-creation with the end user and the scaling partners. Taking both these key stakeholders on the journey ensures that the innovation will be successful later on. As such, partnerships and networks are a key component of ACLAB methodologies. This relates directly to the TIP's focus on socio-technical systems and transversal directions, and this is where the convergence really happened. To support entrepreneurs within the innovation sector, there is a need to focus on building a portfolio of solutions or a suite or a group of solutions. This implies grouping innovations that complement each other and that can be positioned at multiple leverage points in a system to make system-level change. Real transformative impact cannot be achieved by a single solution. Our challenges are far too complex for that. We require integrated solutions. And to train our thinking in this regard, the ACLAB focused on addressing a system, and this was the food, energy, water nexus. In this way, the solutions we experimented on always rendered positive change on these three interlinked sectors. For example, the use of food waste as an energy source or food production systems that recycle grey water. Focusing on the system and root causes also places humanity at the center of the problem, as most systems aim to serve society and most challenges arise from society. Systems thinking reduces the risk of enhancing one sector or one SDG and degrading another. In conclusion, we are lucky to have landed up using TIP approaches, even though unknowingly, to guide our work. The fact that ACLAB South Africa successfully experimented and scaled some solutions is testament to the TIP approach. In hindsight, should we have deliberately employed the TIP structure, perhaps it would have saved us a lot of trouble and a lot of tears along the way, and may have resulted in even greater impact. Nonetheless, TIP approaches can be overlaid on what we've already done to enhance our future work. As ACLAB South Africa, we are proof that TIP works and can help build and nurture niches. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Clariska, for a great presentation summarizing the journey of the UNDP Accelerator Lab with adopting and using transformative innovation policy concepts and thinking. I'm mindful of time, so I think we will move to the third presentation. And again, I would like to remind the audience to please post your questions. They will be passed on to the panelists for broader discussion. So you are encouraged and to write down in the chat any questions or comments that you may have. The third presentation is from Mandy Mlailo from DST. She's been doing fascinating work on the hydrogen economy. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Erica, can you just confirm if you're able to see my face?
I can see your face.
Okay. No, thank you so much. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much for providing me with the opportunity to share reflections on how a transformative innovation approach informs innovation policy interventions to improve livelihoods in South Africa within the context of one of the components of work that is currently undertaken by the Department of Science and Innovation's Hydrogen and Energy Chief Directorate. Just to give you a context, one of the policy experiments that is expected to contribute to South Africa's move towards a hydrogen economy, economic growth, and the implementation of the recently cabinet-approved Hydrogen Society Roadmap is the Platinum Valley Initiative, which is currently supported by the Department of Science and Innovation through the Energy Secretariat at the South African National Energy Development Institute, which is known as SANEDI. As you may be aware, platinum valleys have been used successfully in other countries to promote clean emerging technologies and commercial viability in support of emissions reductions. The Platinum Valley Initiative will therefore create a platform that facilitates the commercialization of publicly funded intellectual property whilst contributing to the beneficiation of platinum group metals. The platform will also attract public as well as private sector investments in clean energy projects, as well as increase government and private sector participation in innovation in line with the 2019 White Paper on Science, Technology and Innovation. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Platinum Valley Initiative will therefore be used to establish niche innovations, as well as accelerate and embed them through the process of upscaling and replication. So in support of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan, and as part of the first phase of the implementation of the Platinum Valley Initiative, a feasibility study on the Hydrogen Valley was recently completed in partnership with Anglo-American Platinum, Bambili Energy Group, and NG Energy Services, South Africa. So the study explored opportunities that will transform the Bushveld complex and larger region around the Johannesburg, Mogalakwena, and Durban into a hydrogen valley, with the goal of driving the planning, designing, construction, and commissioning projects related to the development of a hydrogen valley in South Africa. The study has identified 9 promising projects across the mobility, industrial, and building sectors that could be used as a springboard to the establishment of a South African hydrogen valley corridor, which could contribute up to approximately $100 million to the platinum industry in South Africa by 2030. The study has also projected that the hydrogen demand along the corridor could reach up to approximately 185,000 tons of hydrogen by 2030. In terms of the improvement of the socio-economic conditions of South Africa, the implementation of the South African Hydrogen Valley Corridor could potentially contribute between 3.9 to 8.8 billion to GDP, both direct and indirect contributions by 2050, as well as create approximately 14,000 to 30,000 plus direct and indirect jobs per year by 2030. So, ladies and gentlemen, the policy experiment that I'm going to be reflecting on today, it will be focusing on the conversion of diesel heavy-duty trucks to fuel cell heavy-duty trucks while supporting the upscaling of hydrogen consumption in the transport sector. The Hydrogen Valley will be the first of many projects that will be implemented in partnership with private sector under the overarching Platinum Valley Initiative. So within the context of today's discussion, which is centered around the transformative innovation policy approach, as the DSI puts in place an implementation plan that will contribute to the realization of the South African Hydrogen Valley Corridor, as well as the attainment of the socio-economic benefits that have been articulated in the Hydrogen Valley Feasibility Study report. The principles and the concepts embedded in the transformative innovation approach therefore continues to inform and guide the formulation and the implementation of the policy experiment on the Hydrogen Valley under the Platinum Valley Initiative. The transformative innovation policy approach, it continuously helps us as the DSI team to rethink and reframe our policy decision-making and planning processes in relation to the implementation of the Hydrogen Valley. This assists us to guide our resources in line with the prescripts that have been set under the TIP approach. So within the context of the transformative innovation policy approach, the policy experiment on Hydrogen Valley is essentially a new strategic technological intervention that will be used to open up the current regime, which is currently comprised of diesel heavy-duty trucks and diesel refueling stations, to a technological niche, which is the fuel cell heavy-duty trucks and hydrogen refueling stations, while supporting the upscaling of hydrogen consumption in the transport sector. This will then, we're hoping that it will then translate to a new socio-technical regime, which will be based on hydrogen fuel cell technologies. So the transformative innovation policy approaches multi-level perspective of the socio-technical transition framework continues to guide the framing of the Hydrogen Valley. And it also assists us to better understand the 5 dimensions of the socio-technical nature of system innovation within the mobility sector, which the Hydrogen Valley is centered around. And these 5 dimensions, it helps us to understand, especially on the regulations and policies, what we need, the instruments that we need to implement to address that component of work. It also assists us to better understand the maintenance and distribution networks, to understand the industry structure within the hydrogen economy, to understand the markets and end user practices, and also understand the fuel infrastructures that will be required, as well as understand the culture and symbolic meaning that will need to consider as we implement the Hydrogen Valley policy experiment. Over and above that, the multi-level perspective on the socio-technical transition framework, it also helps us to understand the relevant stakeholders within those 5 dimensions of the socio-technical nature of system of innovation, and how we can continuously ensure that these relevant stakeholders are consulted in a manner that we can bring them together to co-create solutions through participatory approaches. So also the TIP approach multi-level perspective, it also assists us to better understand the 3 levels of socio-technical system, which I've already made, the landscape, the regime, and the niches that we need to navigate across. And it also helps us to understand the interaction between these 3 different levels in driving transformative change in relation to the development of a hydrogen fuel cell-based niche that will then contribute to the system transition, which will be from diesel heavy-duty trucks and diesel refueling stations to fuel cell heavy-duty trucks and hydrogen refueling stations. So in conclusion, within the context of the Hydrogen Valley policy experiment, the transformative innovation approach, a multi-level perspective, it therefore provides the DSI with an analytical approach that can be used to better understand the different key stakeholders within the mobility sector, as well as understand the participatory approaches that could be utilized to change the collective rules embedded in the diesel-based socio-technical system in order to achieve a fuel cell-based socio-technical system. I thank you.
Thanks so much, Mandy, for a great presentation again. There is now some time for discussion, for some questions and answers from the floor.
The co-creation occurs at multiple levels. It's like not one big event, etc. It happens continuously within this policy experiment that you're doing. So for example, let me just take it from the point of view of what I would call the consumer or the user of a toilet, right? So we've asked the question for many years, why are these toilets not kept clean? What is the reasons for some of the rejection? Why the practice around toilets is just very awkward in South Africa? And when you get down to it and start to really engage, and here you use, social scientists that know how to engage with communities and understand from their perspective, what do they want and why some of these things are not working, then you start to get a real depth of understanding, which you can start to see, yes, there is an aspirational value around a flush toilet. And why is there an aspirational value around a flush toilet? Because in many ways, the waste is taken away. You don't get bombarded with flies. You don't get the smell issue as much. So there's various things that they think about, apart from just the look and feel of some of the technologies that were being put out. When you take that kind of information, then you ask the question, this is where we disrupt our own thinking. Okay, it's in terms of how we design technologies for communities. You start to take these things in and say, can we design in a better way? Can we set a higher standard, but still work on affordability and work on the type of technologies that these people may be a little bit more prouder to have in their homes, to be able to look after and keep at a much more sustainable layer. So co-creation in that space is not like everyone sitting around the table and doing it. It's about bringing the right kind of information, using SASTEP as the niche to say, these are the kind of things as an innovator, as a tech developer, you need to take into consideration. And these are the kind of things that they want in their households, maybe in their communal settings. That is one level. The second level that I want to speak to is a little bit different in the sense that co-creation at what I call a national level, where you're trying to shift the regime in terms of policy and where they're moving to, is a little different in the sense that you work by showing, and when they become interested, they set up the mechanisms that pull you in with everyone else. And that co-creation is almost a co-development towards the vision. And so they start to see the science, they see the research, they see what's happening on the ground, and they start to say, well, you know what, we're stuck here. We need to change our policy. We need to change our ways of doing things. And so the institutions start to slowly shift towards something that we all are now seeing as this common vision, the common good.
Thanks, Valerie. Clariska, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, co-creation, I always work with examples. So in my mind, I'm going to refer back to the food garden project that we did. And it was very much, we had a team that designed these 3 types of gardening systems. And a practical example of how we consolidated the view was we engaged community, what we called community facilitators. And these were people in the community that are well known, respected, and known for being involved in agricultural practices. And they went around, it was door to door. It was about close to 200 households where they went into each community door to door to get their views on how does this, a gardening system work for you? Does it make sense in your context, for your garden, for your substrate, for the seeds that you want to plant? And they gathered all of these, this type of data or information. And through what we held was, we had as focused group discussions where all of the community facilitators came back into one single setting and shared these views, shared these thoughts. In that way, we had an opportunity to gather and consolidate all of the views of the end user, so the households that would eventually implement the garden. And the feedback that we received was great. Everything from the diameter of the tower gardens were too large in a particular terrain, which would lead to collapse eventually. Even things like there were people in some of the households that had disabilities, and the gardens were too high for them to reach. So we had to reduce the height of the garden to accommodate that particular end user. So practically, that is how it was done, through community facilitators bringing back the feedback. And I think even in saying that, there'll never be a point where we have all of the views represented in a particular design. So when you do design, you have to give room for flexibility and adaptability. And we've seen this where the households who now have the gardens for over 1 year have actually adapted it to their own needs. For example, they had chickens in their yard that would go in and damage the crop, and they produced their own shielding mechanisms, own nets. And it wasn't part of our original design, but it kind of adapted because of the need. So as far as we can say, co-creation is important. Yes, you must have the view of your end user. You have to leave room for adaptability in your design because it's bound to change. And then, like Valerie mentioned, it's not just the end user's viewpoint that goes towards co-creation. It's the rest of the ecosystem. It's the marketing team. It's the supply chain. It's, you know, the cost of the raw materials that goes into it. And therefore, I mentioned taking those stakeholders on this journey as well to get their viewpoint so that when it does come to investing, to scaling, to developing the business, their viewpoints are already embedded into that design. And that's how I see co-creation happening. Thanks.
Excellent, great. Thanks for the great examples. Mandy, would you like to address the question around vested interest?
Yes, no, thank you so much. I think based on our experience, especially in terms of that we've been driving this hydrogen economy agenda since way back in 2007. What we have come up with, there is a program that deals with the awareness aspects when it comes to hydrogen-related technologies. And this program that we've been supporting is the HISA Public Awareness Demonstration Education Platform. We believe that for any system to change, and any system that, and research and innovation that will drive systematic change, especially in the energy sector, should be supported by a strong awareness program of the technologies being developed. And at this program that we've been supporting, it's a program that is within it, and skills development is embedded within that program. There's also knowledge generation and sharing and stakeholder engagements that are embedded in this awareness program. And what I've seen is that the TIP approach has then has clarified and has assisted us in even understanding the different stakeholders that we are dealing with. And in that manner, in that sense, it has assisted us to then engage with all the different stakeholders to understand their needs and as well as to understand their needs and how these and also select the kind of needs that will contribute to the common vision of what we are trying to address. So in the example of the policy experiment on hydrogen valley, so what we're continuously doing is understanding the needs of each and every stakeholder within the system innovation, as well as, and then we then select the needs that then contribute to the common vision of the hydrogen valley, which will then, based on those common needs that contribute to the common vision, we're then able to mobilize resources accordingly. And then that is when we can be able to gather the necessary buy-in from the stakeholders. Thank you.
I just know recently that at the global level, a number of people are looking at this issue of how to decolonize the knowledge infrastructure, the knowledge process, etc. It's something that the minister has been highlighting to us very strongly as part of the transformation framework work. Is not only thinking about transformation in demographic terms, but also how can we transform the way in which knowledge is being done. So Gerard, the short question is, it's something I think we should pursue. Whether we are doing something in a specific way at this point in time, I think it's still emergent, and we would do this. There was a paper that was shared with me by Peshi Ghosh, who's at SPRU and who's part of the international program. Just some initial thinking. I must confess that when I saw her putting this out on Twitter, I said, please share a copy, but I haven't yet read it. She said, good to see you interested. Comments, please. Let's have a discussion. So it's hopefully something that we can pick up even with the UJ colleagues. And if it's a particular interest of yours, and I'm not too sure how you linked with Erica and whether you're part of the trilateral research here, let's pick it up. From a DSI perspective, it is something I think we want to support and grow and develop and find the scholars and the researchers who are helping us think through those deeper theoretical and philosophical questions, and then looking at how this can in fact permeate into the way that we do things. The NRF already has picked this up, so it's also something that we can have a discussion with them. On the question around the community of practice, I think we're using the word community of practice. I think it's good to continue that at this point in time, but we may want to grow it and look at how we build on what we are doing at the international level, Johan, with the whole concept of building a knowledge infrastructure around transformative innovation policy. Because it's not just about creating, for me, the TIP in a way is a niche activity, but I'm seeing some green shoots of the niche becoming a lot more mainstream. We had something called an interministerial committee, and I was asked to provide a slide on the TIP thinking. So it is being embedded, and I think the time is emerging as we are building up a practice community. We're maturing the work to really look at how we formalize some of these engagements. You know, how do we also ensure that kind of approaches and thinking, it's not left to a session on the TIP, but it's permeating. I'm hoping, for example, there's a session this afternoon, and I'll leave it on this here, on food systems at 3:30 at the Science Forum agenda, and how is it that we then bring some of this thinking in the context of where conversations are elsewhere, and not try to invite people to our conversations, but to go into other people's conversation. And this is something that Glenna and Erica and I have spoken about, and we want to be a lot more targeted. For example, there's a strong development practice community. How do we engage with those so that we don't always try to invite people to our sessions, but begin to lock into other sessions? I don't know if that helps. It's clearly, as we have learned jointly, Johan, over the past 5 years, that it's a journey. It's a process of building up a constituency behind transformative change. And hopefully that will guide us in how we build a community of practice. And Glenda and Erica have really began to do this, and we're looking now at how to even make available a lot more targeted and dedicated capacity so that we can do things a lot more in a conscious way, and really join the dots as we go along. I hope that's helped.
Great, thanks Imran for that. I can see that we are reaching very quickly the end of the session, so I'm not sure we'll have more time for a further round of questions. I would like to thank the presenters for a really great set of thoughts, and I would like to hand over to Glenda for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you everybody for this engagement, and let's take up the challenge to bring this conversation to other settings, because I think it's rich and valuable. And I'd like to encourage the audience, if there are people who would be interested in becoming part of the community of practice and joining in our activities, please contact us, and we can invite you to our future events. And if you are doing work that is akin to this, and maybe it's called something else and you're using a different approach, we would also love to engage and bring you into the community of practice. And please watch out, next year we will be having more webinars, master classes, and we're trying to develop some materials and codify some of these experiences so that they can be used more easily across departments, entities, officials, development practitioners. So thank you to Science Forum for the opportunity, and to everybody on the panel.